Welcome to CISO Interviews, where Affinia hosts cybersecurity executives sharing career advice, actionable insights, and tips so that you can enhance your career and succeed as well.
Chris, thank you so much for joining us today. As we begin, can you say a few words about your current role and what you've been up to?
Yeah, Misha, great to meet you. So I was a co-founder of our risk intelligence solution and joined OnSolve. Our company was acquired by OnSolve in 2020. And since then, I've been a vice president, and I've had a few different roles. One is in global technology solutions, and then more recently in value engineering. And so the most recent function is in helping clients ensure that they understand the financial value and get as much business value out of our solutions as possible.
I understand. And then for those who are not familiar with OnSolve, can you give a 30-second elevator pitch?
Yeah, sure. So think about any disruptive event anywhere around the world: storm strikes, protests, disasters. There's a phase of understanding that this affects the client. We call that risk intelligence. There's a phase of understanding what do we do about that, who needs to know. And there's a phase of warning and protecting employees, whether they're traveling or working from the office. That's called critical communications and travel risk management. The collection of that is critical event management, protecting operations, keeping businesses up and running, and protecting employees.
I understand. So when you said that, I immediately thinking of government, critical infrastructure, large corporates. Did I get it right?
What's been really interesting is that, yes, for sure, governments have a responsibility to protect their constituents, and we have some awesome case studies of detecting a tornado and then using our Code Red solution to alert citizens and mayors have attributed that we've saved lives, and that's one of the things I'm incredibly proud of. And for sure, large companies are around the world, and hotspots from the known hotspots where I worked, or academic, but even storms and hurricanes in the Philippines can be really disruptive. But what we're seeing actually is that even, and I would say increasingly, smaller and smaller companies are starting to think about risk management, all the way from churches to even startups. Once you hit even, call it 1,000 employees, you need to communicate with your people.
Certainly, I understand. And then, if I think I understand the client base, but in terms of applications, you mentioned kind of natural disasters and human factor, whether it's protest or war or some sort of disruption. If you look at those instances, I'm just curious, what kind of split is it? 50-50? Is it more human related impact on companies, or is it more weather related, or kind of hurricanes and fires or whatnot?
I wish there was an easy answer for this, but part of the challenge of this answer is that it completely depends on the company. If you're a small church in Georgia, where I'm from, it could be the hurricanes, or it could be an active shooter nearby. If you're a global company with 1,000 locations, it's going to be all of the above. And so really thinking through the risk profile of that organization, within resilience, there's business continuity and recovery time objectives and business impact analysis, right? So tailoring the risk management approach to the profile of that company is a key part. And just briefly, we are seeing a rise in multiple areas that you mentioned, from natural disasters to active shootings. Organized retail crime is on the rise. There's lots of concerning areas related to risk management in our industry.
Well, the world is getting crazier, which means you'll get more and more work. So it's certainly, it seems this way, at least me reading the headlines. So you mentioned you were a founder and a director of the company that was acquired by OnSolve. I imagine probably it was in a similar kind of risk mitigation space, but how did you get into the space to begin with? What was the first door that you knocked on?
Sure. So I've had a thread of risk management throughout my career. I graduated from West Point in 2001. Like I said, I'm from originally from South Georgia, and West Point was a great way to serve the country and enter the Army. Love my experience there. Became an Army diver soon after. There was a thread of operational risk management there. After serving in the military and going through Ranger School and Airborne School and Air Assault, all the training and some deployments to Kuwait and Egypt, I had a real desire to continue to serve, but as a civilian in Iraq and Afghanistan, where I worked on infrastructure planning projects. And that was really, in Iraq and Afghanistan, was the first time I started thinking about the challenge of understanding, is this area safe? Like Afghanistan's not a monolith, and Kenya's not Georgia's not California, where I'm in, it's not a monolith. Is an area safe, and is the pattern of risk changing? And how do we get that information to the right people at the right time? And that was a real challenge for us. I led civilian teams in Jalalabad and in Shindan province, Kandahar, and in Iraq as well. So I went back to school to answer some questions like, what does data say about safety and security? And I know, Misha, you have a background from Harvard Business School. I got an MBA there, and they have a joint MPA, Masters in Public Administration, International Development degree program that was kind of overlapping with some data science questions, like what does data say about development? And so really wrestled with some hard questions there, and then became director of enterprise risk management for a large NGO. And that was another experience where it was very clear that our industry at the time, this was 2012, 2013, really needed to change. And I'll give you a specific example, but I want to just pause there. I'm kind of long-winded sometimes.
No. It's go ahead.
Yeah. So Mercy Corps, our organization at the time, where I was a director of enterprise risk management, works in 40 of the world's hardest locations, most difficult locations, areas of war and famine, and do just really incredible work. We had signed on for this grant with the British government to rehabilitate the water infrastructure system in Goma, Congo. We had a team of analysts that we had hired to help us with like understanding the risk. And you can imagine, like, do we send people to Goma, Congo, or do we not, right? And the team were great people. They, motivated, mission-oriented individuals trying to help understand the risk of an area. We got the thumbs up, so we started sending engineers and equipment in through, it's kind of on the border of Rwanda, so we sent engineers and equipment through Kigali, drove across the country, enter the country of DRC. And as soon as they get into country, can you guess what they saw? It's hard to know, right? You wouldn't.
Well, I would imagine they saw a blog post and a vehicle with a mounted machine gun, high caliber machine gun, a checkpoint, and they got stopped. I would.
This is a phenomenal guess. I've actually asked that question to people over the years. They saw news and social media saying that M23 militia was expected to attack Goma the following week. And so if you put on the infrastructure hat, we're going to go fix this water system. I mean, this is important. Goma, it's terrible water system. Again, phenomenal organization that I was a part of. But that changes, militia activity changes an infrastructure project, right? And so I get the call from the senior engineer saying, what are we doing here, man? And I realized that, if you kind of break it down into a problem, like our challenges were in detecting that we had an upcoming risk fast enough. And remember, my remit, the organization's remit was in 40 countries, right? So we got all this stuff going on, but how do we detect the risk fast enough in the areas where we need to know? What are the assets at risk? Who are the travelers and people and equipment and local staff and country managers and partners, right? How do you coordinate a response, and how do you reach out to everybody? And what was interesting from that's we learned all that in an after action review, is that concept we saw, my co-founder and I had seen in the military. There was a system you could Google. It's called Blue Force Tracker. Sat in the front of your Humvee. It's big computer, ruggedized laptop or whatever, and you see the good guys in blue, the bad guys in red, and it's common operating picture, and you can have some IRC chats. And so we thought, what an awesome idea. Incredible technology from, the mid 90s, rolled out 10 years later. Could we capitalize on that idea with software, with mobile devices, with faster detection using artificial intelligence, faster alerting, faster visualization, faster communication, all in a common operating picture.
This episode is brought to you by Afinia, a community where 2,000 CISOs and other senior executives network, learn, and succeed together. To apply for your complimentary membership, please visit www.afinia.com or click the link in the show notes. Now, back to the show.
And this was the genesis of that. I think it's a great story. But finish the story. So you got the engineers out before militia moved in.
We did, and candidly, this is not a unique challenge. That's one story. The M23 has continued. If you Google, they continued their to cause disruptions in Goma. Different organizations take different approaches. Most of the NGO community takes the informal term for security there is the Whitebeard plan, which is, well, if you work with locals and get to know the elder members of the community and relationships with kids, that will also typically tip you off on what to do. And then there's others in the space, like the contractors and the U.S. military, that do the opposite. Well, to the degree they can, they work with Whitebeards, but also they up armor and big profile and be the baddest dudes on the street.
Well, I think it's a very interesting topic that's probably we'll run out of time discussing, and it's fascinating. And someone who's binging Jack Ryan and Homeland and spy games, there are plenty of rabbit holes to take us down to. But I'm curious for the sake of the audience, because what we see now is that physical security and cybersecurity, they tend to converge, and kind of in full transparency, a lot of our listeners are kind of leaning more into kind of the technology center of it. But I wonder and maybe they're just getting pulled into meetings or being tasked with something that they were not before. You mentioned that all those threats, whether it's human or climate or what have you, it really kind of dependent on the organization, depending on the footprint, dependent on the infrastructure. But broadly speaking, what are the top 3 themes that you would recommend executives with a cybersecurity mandate would think about on the physical security side? What some of those themes that you see playing out that
Sure.
people should really be paying attention to?
So I'll answer it. We'll talk about some themes, and then maybe we should talk about the confluence of the themes themselves, and then if there's time, we should talk about like how CISOs and CSOs, chief security officers, can move the organization towards actually responding to these. Because building the budget, I heard on a prior podcast, that's also a really important part. Let me just start with the theme. So you've mentioned it several times. In terms of physical disruptions, natural disasters will continue to dominate. This is Chris Hurst speaking, but we're seeing it in the data. If you look at the NOAA page, the most recent, going back since 1980, the number of U.S. billion-dollar disasters is certainly on the rise. The frequency, the severity of those events. Those will continue to dominate the lives of CISOs and CSOs. They will continue to stretch the government organizations. So if you think about mutual assistance compacts at the state level, and those will continue to reinforce the importance of resilience programs in private companies. So natural disasters for sure is a good place to start.
And those, just kind of to double click and not to cut you off here, but are those more kind of the hurricanes hitting, I know, Texas and Louisiana and Florida, or is it the tornadoes turning little towns upside down? Is it the fires like the one in Maui, do you see those disasters more skewed towards hurricanes and kind of the water damage, or others?
In terms of the costliness, hurricanes tend to be the most costly. We are seeing a rise in wildfires, and Maui is a great example. And if there's time, we can talk about AI prediction support for coordination there. You you mentioned tornadoes. Tornadoes tend to be less costly than large tornadoes are less costly than large hurricanes, though they are part of. You'll certainly see them if you, again, it's publicly available. Go to NOAA's website. With tornadoes, what's interesting there is there's this concept of a tornado alley, and that's actually shifting. Chicago O'Hare actually had a tornado disruption this year for the first time in a long time, and so there's shifts in each of these. I want to move on for time here.
So of course. No, I'm curious. So many questions. No, go ahead.
There's a lot to cover with each of these topics. When we started the company, there were geopolitical assumptions of stability that have proven clearly in the last 10 years to be false. I'll give you an example. Ukraine is a great place to hire software engineers. Well, it's a great place, still amazing software engineers, but it's obviously unstable. And this year, after October 7th, the war in Gaza, I suspect we're going to see another significant geopolitical event of instability. Maybe that's Taiwan. For time here, I'm just going to say that, the large global multilateral sort of institutions, formal and informal, I think there's, potential for cracks there. So this is like, what kind of world do people want to live in? Multilateral versus isolated. The third bucket is probably around U.S. elections, and there's likely to be some exposure of fragility in the U.S. systems of like how we think about democracy. I'm optimistic and pro-American. I think ultimately institutions are going to hold, but I think there's potential for fragility there next year. One other theme: organizations with large retail footprint or just large, brick and mortar. There's a significant uptick in organized retail crime, and we could go deeper on each of these. I think the last trend I'll just mention is that, clearly large language models are a superpower, and they're a superpower for the good guys and the bad guys. So those are probably the top 5 themes. Just on that last one, large language models, for democracies, for U.S. elections, for response to natural disasters like Maui, you need to understand like what's reality, and the power of LLMs in the hands of a bad guy is that they can make, the cost of content zero. And so if you want to pollute the information environment on what the reality is, everything related to disasters is a great place to do that. It's a terrible place to do, right? Is a fragility for response.
This episode is brought to you by Afinia, a community where 2,000 CISOs and other senior executives network, learn, and succeed together. To apply for your complimentary membership, please visit www.afinia.com or click the link in the show notes. Now, back to the show.
For sure. And on the first 4 things that you mentioned, they're kind of, I would imagine they're kind of really in your wheelhouse. The natural disasters, the geopolitical changes, elections next year, and organizations with a large physical footprint. Will be on the tactical level. I'm a CISO, and I'm more and more getting pulled into meetings that address some of those issues. What will be your advice? Is it more about trying to picture what's the worst thing that can happen? What we're going to do about it? Is it about disaster recovery plans? Is it redundancy? Is it building resilience into the system and kind of spreading the footprint, whether it's remote employees, whether it's redundancy and other content? It's like, what are some of the, and again, it's probably worth a much longer conversation, but what are the topical ideas that on a tactical level CISOs can sound knowledgeable when they go into those meetings?
I think you want to understand where you're at on a maturity model, and you can think about that in terms of your people, your systems, your processes, or people, processes, and technology, whatever your framework is. I speak with a lot of organizations, even in 2023 this year, who have very little, I'm going to call it digital modeling of their organization. So if you ask them, you know, like literally, where are your assets? And at first it's kind of surprising. Really, you don't know where your facilities are. But if you think about siloed organizations, you think about a lot of M&A activity, you think about leases going up and down, you think about travelers all over. So that's a very tactical initial place to start, is just being able to map your organization, integrate a bunch of data, your travel data, your HR data, your facilities data. Obviously, this is something that you know, companies in our industry can help with, and it's a great place to start. The next is you want to think about tailoring your approach to risk management based on organizations that look like yours. And so, you know, if you're a retail organization, what have been the major themes that have really disrupted retail organizations like yours in the past year or two? That's one of the reasons why I mentioned the rise of organized retail crime. And so then once you know kind of where your stuff is, where your assets and people are, what the risks are, then it's really easy to just dial in your filters to be able to say, like, hey, these are the tactical incidents I care about. These are the more strategic. So that's kind of like the systems and processes. There's another piece, which is it's low-hanging fruit. I would be running exercise. I ran exercises when I was the director of ERM. We worked with our security team. You just got to workshop your workshop scenarios, and they can be formal. We work with some awesome partners, so we could help you with that, but it doesn't have to be formal. Literally just creating brief scenarios, getting leaders together periodically, for sure annually, but I suggest more frequently than that, and create scenarios and say, well, what would we do? They need to be written down. There's regulations requiring that you write them down, but I think just talking to people it will get you so far. Asking the question, what would we do? Who needs to know? How would we know? Those questions.
It's almost like a fire drill of sorts, right? Except it's not when you just leave the building and check your email on the way out and then walk back, but it's actually really thinking through of, if this happens, that we do this, and how we recover communication. Is it what happens if this person is not accessible? No, it's very interesting. I know we're coming up on time a little bit, but if we look into the future, and you mentioned like geopolitical risks, it feels like the pendulum that was swinging towards integration, towards globalization, is swinging the other way, and it seems like a lot of organizations, instead of offshoring, they are reshoring or friendshoring, if you wish. So it seems like it is a tendency for the world to be a more divided place, and it's, to your point, it seems like this trend is only going to continue next year into kind of foreseeable future. It's certainly the world is getting scarier and scarier. But from what you see, some of those trends, I know 6 months from now, 12 months from now, the things that you mentioned, they still going to be top of mind? Are there certain emerging themes that you see will likely to play out in that time frame that will impact chief security officers and CISOs?
Yeah, so I'll talk about it at a sort of philosophical, super strategic, mega level, and then I'll make it super tactical. I think, like I said, Americans and all participants in economic participants, Chinese citizens, everyone have to wrestle with the question is like, is it better for us to buy stuff from other countries and continue to trade or not? And this is like a kind of a core civics question that I don't think we wrestle very well with as a society. So I think if you take a basic economics class, econ classes, you take there's winners and losers from trade, right? And so what you do is you tax the winners and you have transfers and you do retraining, and everybody's better off. There's the classic like Portugal grapes and clothes made in Britain, and that's the story. You can see it in the math, but what's missing there is identity, and like, well, my job is to make this thing, and my identity is to make it, and it takes a long time to retrain, and there's like these like there's friction along the way, so it's not smooth. And so I do see, it feels a little bit to me like we're kind of like in the League of Nations, kind of like what kind of world do we want? Woodrow Wilson, isolation versus multilateralism. I think that feels to me like so that's the philosophical, like what happens on this, the tactical side. I think supply chains up through COVID were increasingly concentrated in a few countries like China. And you could concentrate everything with volume discounts through a few ports, through a few carriers, through a few a few vendors. And I think, as long as the world's stable, that's great. Volume's efficient, right? Just in time delivery. But I think the key takeaway from the pandemic has been to relook pushing everything through a single country factory port, because assumptions of stability haven't held. And so we can help with that, right? So you can map map not just your assets, but your customers, your supply chains, and be able to make better decisions there.
Interesting. So a system that's extremely efficient, that just-in-time inventories may not be resilient when it's stressed. So it sounds like, and that's kind of the pendulum swinging the other way. That's awesome. Chris, I know we're coming up on time. Thank you for being so generous. Very interesting. I think we can talk for a very long time. I'm certainly hopeful if this was fun. This was fun for me. If this was fun, we can do this again and maybe double click on some of those areas and tumble on some of those rabbit holes. What's the best way for people to connect? How can people find you?
Awesome. Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, Chris Hurst, Vice President at OnSolve. You can find me on email, chris.hurst@onsolve.com.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Misha. Appreciate it. Great fun today.
If you liked this episode, please subscribe to this channel and visit afinia.com for more information about your complimentary membership, or click the link in the show notes.